Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, we welcome into our studio this morning from the Kapiti Aviation Museum. It's John Kennedy. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nigel.
How's the Aviation Museum going?
Oh, it's plodding along, yes.
Yeah, good.
Too right. Yeah. We've got a lot of books in there, you know.
Yes.
What actually happens is that a husband dies and he's got all these aviation books and the widow doesn't know what to do with them.
Right.
And they very kindly get donated to us, but many of them we've already got.
Right.
So we dispose of them at a very modest price. The funds we use obviously to develop the museum on a little bit further. But, you know, I'll be back there after my broadcast with you. So anyone wants to toddle down and have a look, we've got a raft of them there, which some very interesting books that ordinarily would cost a lot of money out of the local bookseller or wherever. Yeah.
Some of those might be related to Anzac Day, might they? In the way of war books and things like that.
Well, there's tons of those. Yes, too right.
Because there's some interesting stories in those. I've just been sent up a whole lot from various publishers, you know, and some great stories still coming out. Yeah.
It's actually, with aviation, it's an amazing thing. It never ceases to fascinate people, does it? It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if a truck crashes on the road, well, no one takes a heck of a lot of notice, although we have enough of them, I suppose. But if an aeroplane crashes somewhere, my goodness gracious me, it's headline stuff.
Yeah, that's dead right. And like this airline that this woman got sucked out through the window. Now, I'm not decrying it all, but that was one woman who got sucked out. But you think the catastrophe it could have been, it could have been the whole blooming lot got killed. And so,
well, actually, I was going to have a chat to you about that little lot.
Well, you get into it. I'll just shut up and you carry on. I'll go and have a cup of coffee.
I think you should interrupt and correct me where it's necessary.
Where you go, John. But, lovely to have you in.
We're talking about Southwest Airlines. It was a Boeing 737-700 series, and it was flying between New York and Dallas with 149 people on board, and that would include the flight deck crew and the cabin crew. But it diverted to Philadelphia after its port engine disintegrated in flight, and there's all sorts of theories out, but it sounds like it might have been a turbine blade that's come off, and of course that's rattling around in the jet engine is going to make it explode, which this one did. And this happened at 32,000 feet at 500 miles per hour. And what happens in that situation is what they call rapid decompression, and a part of the engine has flown out and it has knocked out a window, and unfortunately sucked out a lady passenger who unfortunately has passed away since. But at that altitude, from what I remember about it, is that unless you get oxygen to your brain in about 3 minutes' time, you're going to suffer pretty severe brain damage. And what the crews normally do, it's a normal emergency procedure, they descend very rapidly. In fact, they dive. It'll be very frightening for anyone on board because all the oxygen masks are deployed because the cabin is depressurised. It's a bit like a balloon. If you blow up a balloon and then, as we did as kids, let it go, it makes that funny sound.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's exactly what happened to that aeroplane, and of course the crew have got to do something pretty quick about it. And the woman captain of that aeroplane obviously acquitted herself quite well. The US National Transport Safety Board is investigating it, and it seems that the protective ring surrounding the engine is the prime focus that they're actually looking at. And you can come back to Qantas, you remember a few years ago with an Airbus A380.
Yes.
Took off from Singapore, and it returned because they had a very similar thing that happened. In fact, the so-called protective ring around the jet engine is meant to stop, if you like, it's shrapnel. The engine actually breaks up. And in that case with Qantas, it actually damaged the wing. And of course, most modern aeroplanes, jet aeroplanes, have all their fuel tanks in the wing. And that Qantas A380 was leaking fuel like a sieve. And it got back, fortunately, with a very experienced crew on board that managed that. And it sounds like the lady captain of this Southwest Airlines one was a former United States Navy pilot, and she flew F-18 Hornets, so she's probably pretty well experienced.
Yes. Yeah.
But they are. That's the sort of thing that they have in flight simulators for, and they put all sorts of tricks on them, whoever the coach, if that's the right word, or the captain that's putting them through the hoop, so to speak. In fact, way back, you remember that British Airways one that got caught in the volcano over Indonesia?
Yes, and all that stuff.
And all the four engines stopped.
Yes.
That'll be a little bit frightening, to say the least.
Hard to get them to glide.
Well, we had we have a member of the museum who's a former Qantas 747 captain.
Yes.
Said Boeing 747s glide particularly well.
Do they?
I sort of have a few reservations about that, to be quite honest.
He would know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And I know NAC had the one way back with the early 737s. They had the odd engine that malfunction, and it's got quite a frightening thing. And you're relying very much on the skill of the crew.
Yeah, sure.
And while we're on that one too, in the same vein, no pun intended, Air New Zealand's are having similar problems with its Boeing 787 Dreamliner fleet. I think they've got 11 of them now. And it's a Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines, and I feel sorry for them because it's put 6,400 passengers upsetting their plans, and they're being rebooked and what have you, and it'll be Air New Zealand's and their travel agents' nightmares to sort that little lot out.
Yes.
That's
mainly on the Perth route too, at the moment.
Yes, well, they actually started off on that. My partner Anne and I went over about 3 years ago, and they'd only just started that. Apart from the problems they're having now, it's actually a beautiful aeroplane.
It's lovely to ride, isn't it?
Yeah,
so quiet. Sure. Yeah.
We actually came back on the Dreamliner as well, and the captain told us we're going to be arriving an hour and a half early because we got into a jet stream, and that's sort of because the predominant wind patterns, of course, go from west to east, and that coming back's faster.
Yeah. Did you get a refund?
No.
Oh dear, yes. I just watched the other night, though. I'm very interested. They show you how they changed a 380 engine. They did it in 2 hours. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Those engines are $37 million each.
Yep. There's
and they just dropped one out, and what really scared me, there's 4 bolts holding in the back and 6 holding the front, or vice versa. And I thought, what, 10 bolts holding that weight of engine? It didn't sound right to me.
They must be very strong bolts.
I would say so.
Because we can go way back to the problems with the DC-10 from way back, and you know how they're on pylons. And one of the things that they found that an airline in the United States lost a DC-10 in Chicago, O'Hare Airport there, and they found that the way they were servicing them, they were lifting the engines off and putting them back on with the help of a forklift, which was not entirely recommended. But there weren't a hell of a lot of bolts involved in that aeroplane way back either.
So that scared me even more. So that was it. Well, I say if you're going to fly, you're going to fly, and if things happen, well, it's no worse than driving on the motorway.
Yeah, we're having enough wax on that, I notice, aren't we?
Yes, we are indeed.
Locally. I also want to touch on Air New Zealand's withdrawal here from Kapiti Airport. After operating the Q300 aeroplane from 2011 to 2018 and dropping Christchurch service, possibly because of their very poor timings, but from a former airline point of view, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle fitting aeroplanes together. If you make an advantage to one port, you probably, unless they increase their fleet by buying more aeroplanes, you're going to disadvantage another one. And I had that in my own time with the Friendship operation way back. For example, we'd had a Friendship service out of Gisborne, and we were running a little bit short of capacity out of Napier, and I knew darn well that there was an aeroplane that left reasonably early in the morning for a day's business in Wellington from Gisborne, but it was only half full, and I persuaded the powers that be and our head office to divert that aeroplane via Napier so we could use the extra 20 seats. That went down like a lead balloon in Gisborne, as you can imagine. They didn't want another 20 minutes in their journey to head down. And there are other occasions too when I wanted to get an aeroplane that was going to leave Napier earlier so we can get a decent full day's business and what have you. But that meant the aeroplane was probably leaving Auckland at about quarter to 6 in the morning, which didn't please the Auckland travellers at all. So what I'm trying to say, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, one way or another. So your heart goes out to them at times. But the way they handled the Paraparam one, I'm afraid that from a public relations point of view, I would score them 1 out of 10, particularly when 6 days prior to that they had an open day with a Q300 aeroplane on the tarmac and say, come and have a look at our wonderful aeroplane. That went down, I noticed, like a lead balloon. But looking at it from Air New Zealand's perspective, I guess their reasons for abandoning Kapiti, there will be multiple reasons for it. NAC, of course, was a monopoly in their day, and they had a very simple reason behind that. Because if you were running out of capacity, you had to look at what are we going to do about it. Well, we had to find another aeroplane or aeroplanes to do that. And if you're wanting a new aeroplane, the lead time to get one could be a minimum of about 18 months. Or you could go and find a second-hand one somewhere on the world marketplace. And if things are going well, as they generally do worldwide, there's none available. So NAC had a very simple method of working that one out. They put the fares up, which diminished demand.
Yes.
Problem solved.
Right.
But then it was accused, quite rightly, I suppose, of being a blinking monopoly, and how dare they? So similar sort of things happen here too, even now. But, and surprisingly, you've got a 51% government ownership of that, and which was sold off in recent years. So it's a public company. It always has been, but they've sold off 49% of the shares. And in doing that with shareholders, the government included, and the other 49%, they want a return on their investment. So they're between a rock and a hard place, and they're going to make the best usages that they can. And I would imagine, a little like what I just explained, even back in the old NAC days, is that they've got other routes that are clamouring for more capacity.
Yes.
And I can think of places like Hamilton, Napier Hastings,
Tauranga.
Tauranga to a lesser extent, Hamilton, I think I mentioned, Palmerston North and Nelson. They're all probably saying, we need more seats. And they've had to make I'll use the term, a corporate decision, and poor old Paraparauma's probably been the neck on the chopping block reason for it.
Yes.
So it's not easy, but I guess the way they handled it probably could have been improved somewhat, hence my rude comments of 1 out of 10 and the way it was handled.
Because I got told that Air New Zealand really didn't want to be part of that open day, but they were involved because their plane landed at 11:30 in the morning. So.
They're involved by default.
Yes.
But as I predicted in our chat last month, that Air Chatham seemed to be the most likely carrier to fill the gap. But planning and setup arrangements do take time, and if Air Chathams do take over the route, it could take several months before they do so. I don't know how far down the track they are. But some of the arrangements may well include negotiating local government subsidies. That would please the Kapiti Coast District Council no end.
Yes, that's right.
But it wouldn't surprise me because that's been... Well, Wellington City, reasonably close at hand, paid an enormous amount to keep Singapore Airlines, or get Singapore Airlines to operate.
Yes.
Initially, of course, it was Wellington, Canberra, Singapore, but I note they've changed to make it Wellington, Melbourne,
that's right.
Singapore. I can understand the reasons, because probably the traffic that was generated out of Canberra wasn't sufficient for it.
Yep.
But Wellington, Singapore probably was. The other thing, of course, is they're operating a Boeing 777, and my guess is with an aeroplane of that size, it's probably on a very reduced payload. So there are a lot of operating economics involved there. It'd be interesting to explore that one a bit further. And the same thing, I guess, has happened with Westport and Taupo and a few others, where you've got Sounds Air that have popped there, and they've got amazing little aeroplanes, but they're very expensive to operate. And I suspect, but I can't confirm, that there might have been a bit of local body assistance in there.
Sure.
But the aircraft type that Air Chatham proposed operating is a Saab 340A, and they were previously used by Air Nelson before they purchased their Q300s, which they were operating here up until recently. But there appear to be some performance restrictions with it, however, and that happened actually with the Q300s. I mean, there's a few trees on the short finals area that had to be cut down or trimmed here at Paraparaumu before the Air New Zealand to start operating. And I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but one of the interesting things that I note is that they've suggested that they might have to install traffic lights on Kapiti Road. And I have to think that, what's going on? Well, of course, the penny dropped ultimately, because if they're taking off to the south, the aircraft would be back onto Kapiti Road, and they'd be putting it on full power while it was on the brakes, and there'd be one huge slipstream that would be roaring through.
Yeah, sure.
Might blow a car or two over without the traffic lights. So that's the conclusion that I've come to. So they'd need as much power as possible, and they've stated in the media that that's the possibility of that happening with the lights going on about 10 times a week.
Yeah.
Would rather depend on which way the wind was blowing.
Yeah.
The aircraft is actually configured as a 34-seater. Ian Nelson, when they operated them, had them as a 40-seater. And one of the problems that they had, they were operating out of Napier when I was there, and they cubed out. In other words, it was really a briefcase special, that aeroplane, particularly with 40 seats in it. In other words, businessmen going from, say, a provincial city to Auckland or to Wellington, it was great because all they had was briefcases. But with a mixed load, particularly from my Napier experience, they would have people that were connecting to overseas airlines and they had plenty of baggage, and they'd queue out, and then passengers weren't too impressed if they got up to Auckland but their baggage stayed behind. But I note that they're operating it as a 34-seater. Maybe that's the reason, and maybe they won't strike that problem. They currently operate Saab 340s 3 times daily each way between Wanganui and Auckland, and looking at their schedule online, they're doing that with one aeroplane. They operate a similar timetable to Wakatani, between Auckland and Wakatani. They use 19-seat Fairchild Metroliners, and they're commonly known as flying pencils. Yes, the way they look. And the website indicates that they've got 3 Saab 340s in their fleet, so it would seem that they're adequately equipped to take on the Parapam Auckland services, allowing for the occasional serviceability. It's all very well having 1 or 2 aeroplanes. When you're operating several routes and an aeroplane becomes unserviceable, you've got real problems.
Yeah, that's right.
You're telling your dear passengers, well, I'm terribly sorry, your flight has been cancelled. Yeah. Craig Enemy, their general manager, has publicly suggested they're also looking at operating Parapam Christchurch, and all this becomes a reality. Kapiti promises to become very well served.
Does indeed, John. Yeah. Well, we better stop there and we'll continue on next month, shall we?
Oh, indeed, yes.
Good on you.
If you'll have me.
Thank you for your very valuable time this morning. And you're off down to the Aviation Museum. If anybody wants to look at some books, you've got a fair supply of good, interesting books.
We have indeed.
Good on you. John, have a nice day and we'll catch you next month. John Kennedy.
106.3 Beach FM.